Hey everyone, welcome to part one of a two-part series on one of my favorite Docker containers. Today we're going to take a look at an amazing application called Unmanic by Josh 5. Unmanic, as the page here says, is a simple tool for optimizing your video library to a single uniform format. For those of us with large media libraries, I can say from first-hand experience that this is a lifesaver. In this video, we're going to cover basic installation, setup, and a look at how well it performs. So let's get started. Okay, here we are starting out on our Unraid dashboard. We're going to go ahead and switch over to Community Applications. And we're going to do a search for Unmanic. There it is. Let's hit that install button. And let's get started. Now you can see right off the bat here that this container supports NVIDIA GPU use and Intel GPU use. The instructions there are pretty straightforward. There are some other forums, and Space Invader's done some videos about how to get some of these set up. We're not going to go into that right here, but just know that the capabilities are there. If you just on the top right go over here to your advanced view, you'll be able to see where the extra parameters are that you can enter all those special tags in there if you need to. Now the container port 8888, we can leave that the way it is. Our app data path, we can leave that the way it is. By default, the template has a path filled in here for you already. And if this is not exactly how you already have your media path set up, then this will by default create new folders. And that's not what we want in our case. I've already got a media library set up, so I'm going to change these to that path. So I'm going to back out of this. And as you can see here, I've already got a media folder. There it is, Plex. And in this instance, we're going to be looking at our movies, so I'm just going to click that, and I'll be good to go. And I'm going to do the same thing for TV. Let's back out of the default pre-filled path and go into the share that we already have set up for our Plex library. In my case, it's Plex. Yours may be MB or Jellyfin or some other media library, but in my case I have it labeled as Plex, and then I'm going to click TV shows. The encoding cache directory, this is an interesting thing. For those of you who already transcode your streams, say your Plex streams or your MB streams to RAM, you do have the option to do that with this. If you leave this as default, it will write to disk. So you may want to specify a cache share. If you don't have that set up already, that's easy enough to do. Or you can set this to transcode to RAM. Now in my case, I have about 192 gigs of RAM, which is way more than I use. So if you wanted to transcode this to RAM, you can just do /tmp, and it'll go ahead and use all the available RAM that you have. Well, it won't use all the available RAM, but it will allocate itself into the RAM instead of writing to a disk all the time for these transcodes. Now, if you don't have much RAM, you may not want to set all of it to be used by the cache directory here. So let's say you've only got 32 gigs of RAM and you want to transcode your cache, your encodes here to RAM. Another thing you can do is type dev/shm. And what that does is in Linux, it's a special, in some Linux distributions, it's a special allocation of only 50% of the RAM. So I'm going to go ahead and set this under dev/shm. And then one last thing you can do here, especially for those of us that may have more limited system resources, is if we go back up to the top right and switch to advanced view, it gives us, as many of us are probably already aware, the option to pin our CPU cores per container. So for my case, I want to go ahead and pin a few of these cores. So let's just say about right there. That's where I want to leave it. And then let's go ahead and hit apply and let that pull down. Okay, now that that's done, let's hit done and go ahead and go back to our Docker tab. And let's open up Unmanic. Go to our web UI. And here we are. So now I purposefully have this switched for demonstration purposes to an Unmanic instance that I already have installed, just so you can see what it looks like when it's already running. But we're still going to go through the install process. So as you can see here, one of my favorite shows that I have legally purchased is Everybody Loves Raymond, and you can see that as it's processing here, I've got what are called workers, 3 workers working on Season 4, Episode 13, Season 4, Episode 18, Season 4, Episode 11, and these are all the different, over here on the completed tasks side, these are all the different conversions that I've had from X264 in the .mkv format that have been converted to, I like to run X265 in the MP4 format. So let's take a look real quick at some of the file compressions and conversions. So if on the bottom right here, if you hit see all records, you can see right here, I've had this running for quite a while, 5,393 records. If you hit view details, you can get a pretty good glimpse at the statistics for each file. So the original file here was 794 megabytes. The new file here is 185. That's a 76% reduction. The original file info, you can see it was a .mkv file format. Stereo, 2 channels, 1080. The new file, same thing, only you'll notice it's a .mp4, stereo, 2 channel, and it's still a 1080. And I have found the MP4 format for a lot of my users that share my Plex library. MP4 is the most universal format that there is as far as the least amount of transcodes. Now when you start switching everything over to the 265 codec as opposed to the 264, you're going to inherently need to transcode more of those. So just anticipate that. A lot of the newer platforms have 265 support, and they don't all have to transcode it to 264, but most of them will, at least for the time being. But the file savings, as far as the size goes, is unbelievable. So let me back up a little bit further into my history here and show you some other shows that let's take a look at the Good Lord Bird here that I have purchased legally. So that one, a lot of the newer shows that come out, you'll see them already in 265 format. So this was not a very big file to begin with. I download 1080 files, 1080p files, full HD, and that was already only 451 megabytes. So you can see right here it only took 5 seconds, and what that does basically is it just converts it from, if I look on the original file info here, an MKV over to an MP4. And oftentimes that will save you having to transcode your streams to other users if their player doesn't support an MKV format already. So let's see, Big Brother, that's one of my big ones that I like to record and watch. You can see it took it from almost 1.4 gigs down to 430 megs, which is amazing. There's the duration right there, 3 hours and 21 minutes. And keep in mind that that is transcoding in RAM. That conversion takes place in my RAM as opposed to writing all of that in a disk, on disk, and then outputting it into my Plex library. So generally speaking, this Unmanic, looks like it didn't make a big difference here. And that's not always going to be the case. 6-channel output. It's not going to be the case every single time that it reduces the file, but I would say probably 8 times out of 10 you can count on it reducing the file. You'll notice that some of these are failed, and some of it has to do with whether you take the subtitles out, whether you leave them in. It has to do with the original file encoding, and there's just a lot that goes into it. So you can see all of these shows that I have here legally purchased or that are digitized, that I'm just compressing for my own personal library. If I wanted to look at Alaska: The Last Frontier here, that one was already in 265 format, but we can see at least that it converts it from an NKV to an MP4. Masters of Sex, that's a great show. If anybody has ever watched that or you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. That was an 8% reduction from 2.7 to 2.5. Let's see if we can Aqua Teen. Some of these fail, but in general, most of these are going to be 14 seconds. Again, that's just a container conversion. Video container conversion. Sons of Anarchy, those didn't seem to make it. It's Always Sunny, another great show. Now just keep in mind, folks, these are all shows that I have legal ownership over, that in my media library I like to compress. So here's a great example right here. This one went from 1.4 gigs all the way down to 454 megabytes, almost a 70% decrease in file size. And that one took about an hour and a half. So again, you can look at on your dashboard, you can assign these different workers, and some people say it doesn't make a difference as far as time goes, whether you have 3 workers, whether you have 9 workers, whether you have 1 worker. I've found, at least for me and my hardware setup, it seems like 3 workers seems to be the sweet spot. I've tried it multiple different ways. If I just have 1 worker, it takes about the same amount of time per file as if I have 3 workers. Now if I add 4, it really starts to slow down, and it's about the same amount of time as if I had 3. So in my instance, it seems like 3 file conversions happening simultaneously is the sweet spot. So let's take a look at our settings and see exactly how we get all of this set up and running, and all the different options that we have to configure here for our Unmanic instance. Okay, so the first thing that we notice when we click on Settings under the General tab, we can see that we've got a few options here. Here's our paths. If you'll remember earlier, we mapped the library path to /movies and /TVs. We can see that here, and we also mapped our cache path. So inside the container right here, this is where the transcoding takes place. And right here, you can map this to either /library, to where it will include both your TV and movie libraries. You can narrow it down and be a little more specific, so you can map it to just library/TV. And you can even browse and take this all the way down to a specific show or whatever you want to do. So for me right now, I have this specific one just working on my entire TV library, and I have another Unmanic container on a different machine that's working on my movie library. And I've found that this is a pretty great way of handling that. What you don't want to do is have more than one instance of Unmanic running on the same folder path. So for example, I've got this one here running on my TV shows. I don't want another Unmanic instance also running on just my blanket TV show library path. Here I've got my workers. Again, I went over this a little bit earlier. For me, it seems like 3 is kind of the sweet spot. Your mileage may vary, so Feel free to experiment with this. On my other machine, I have it working on my movies. And on that specific machine, it seems like 1 is kind of the magic number on that one. I do have the watcher enabled. That's pretty straightforward. Library scan, I have this for TV shows. I have it set for every 30 minutes. I believe on my movie folder, I have it set for, I want to say, every 3 hours or so. The file name history, you want to keep that checked. And the debugging, you don't really have to worry about that unless you're having a problem. If you are having an issue, a recurring issue, then you can enable that right here. And when you do that, you hit submit, and then you can come back to the dashboard. You can go to see all records, and then on the view details, you'll be able to see right here where it says mpeg command log, no log recorded. That's because I don't have my debug enabled. But if you do enable that, then you'll see the command log for that file right here. So now let's take a look at the container settings that we have. And here's where we're able to set the extensions that we want Unmanic to add to the queue. As you can see, it comes pre-filled with a few options, and I've added some more here. I'll leave this down in the description so you can copy and paste it into your box here if you want to do that. The output container, as I said earlier, I like to use MP4. A lot of folks like to use MKV, but I just think that MP4 is a lot less burdensome on the Plex server. It requires a lot less transcoding. Even though if you're doing HEVC or 265 codecs, you will have some transcoding that goes along with that, but a lot of the newer hardware devices are supporting that now, so it's becoming more and more popular, I think, to use MP4 265. I also removed the subtitles. It seems like I have a lot less failures on my video transcodes if I do that. And then I can supply them later on with Bazaar. So if you haven't watched my video on that, be sure to check that out. As for the video encoding, you want to make sure that you have that enabled in the box right here. Video codec, HEVC. Now some of you may not want to do HEVC, and it also gives you the option to run 264. In my case, I'm not using a graphics card, I'm just using my CPU, so I've got this set to the lib 265. If you have a NVIDIA graphics card, you can use that here. And if you've got Intel GPU capabilities, you should be able to set that here. As far as I know right now, I did a little trial and error with that on my test server that supports Intel GPU. And even with the extra parameter set, I wasn't able to get that working. So if any of you have had luck with that, be sure to let us know. But as for day-to-day use, I stick to the libx 265, and I have great success with that. The audio encoding, you want to make sure that you have this enabled if you choose to transcode the audio. Now in my case, I like to switch everything over to AAC. Some folks like to use AC3. You do have that option here. Or if you want to use MP3, that may not be quite as popular, but if you have a specific use case, at least you have the option. And there's also the option to create a stereo clone of the streams. Now I will tell you, and just as a reminder, that Unmanic still is in beta. And when I had this enabled before, I was getting the stereo clone that is outlined here, but it was also deleting my original audio. So if I had a 5.1 or a 7.1 audio channel, then even though I had the clone set to come up here, it was removing my original 6 channels or 5 channels altogether. So maybe at some point this will get fixed, but as of right now, I would probably recommend that you leave this alone. If you find that you're getting a lot of failures, you can always turn the audio encoding off and just leave it as it is. Even still, transcoding audio is going to be much easier for your server than just doing audio and video. So if you're seeing a lot of failures, try playing with this a little bit, toggle it on, toggle it off, and see how you do. As far as the advanced options go, this is a recent addition to the container. If any of you are well versed in ffmpeg, you do have the option to add customizations here. I tend to leave this off because I've got Unmanic set to a large array of files, and so this will override all of the basic settings that Unmanic has built in. But for me, I just like to leave it. If you want to go over here and set your library path, say to a specific movie, like if you've got a 4K movie that you want to manually plug in the library path here, and then come to your advanced options and then plug in any kind of specific command, that would be a great thing to do here. But since I've got this going from all different kinds of video and audio sources that may differ and change as it moves on, this just isn't a great option for me, and probably won't be for most of us here. So we're gonna leave that off. And that's gonna bring us back to the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it's helpful. Be sure to drop a line here and support Josh 5, the great work that he's doing. I think this is gonna be a great tool for a lot of us to save on disk space. That'll keep us from having to buy hard drives. It's a whole lot cheaper to support a dev than it is to buy a new hard drive. So this has been a great container for me to save space on my disks. I've got about 32 terabytes of storage space, and I guarantee that I would be at least at 70 to 75% capacity as opposed to 47%. And I've been running this for about a year with great success. In the next video, I'm going to go over how you can set up more than one Unmanic container working on a single library. So be sure to check out that next video. And until next time, guys, I appreciate you stopping by. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.